In this lecture, we're going to be looking at media representations of sexuality. We're going to look at how the media represents sexual behaviour, as well as the LGBTQAI plus communities. And we're going to look at the stereotypes that they are using, as well as the symbolic annihilation of the LGBTQA plus communities in mainstream media. But alongside that, we're also going to look at how the rise of new media has impacted representation of different sexualities within the media. But to start off with, we really need to think about what we mean by sexuality, because it can have two different meanings, and we are going to look at both in this lecture. The first is talking about who somebody is attracted to, who they have sexual feelings and behaviours towards. And there are a number of different sexualities. There's asexual, bisexual, lesbian, polyamorous, polysexual, pansexual, homosexual. And it covers a wide spectrum of sexualities in terms of who people are attracted to. But what we also need to be aware of is that sexuality can also mean about the sexual behaviours and attitudes of a person, particularly in terms of their gender, age and disability. So it's going to be a little bit of a recap on those as well. So do make sure that you are clear when you're talking about sexuality within terms of media representation, which type of sexuality you are referring to. Are you referring to who people are attracted to, or are you referring to sexuality in terms of sexual behaviour? Now we're going to start off by looking at media representations of sexuality in terms of sexual behaviour, and we're going to go back and look a little bit at gender, age and disability to show which this attitude towards sexual behaviour. So if we look first at gender, when women are represented in the media in terms of their sexual behaviour, they're often demonised for it. They are told that they are promiscuous if they have more than one partner. They are called horrific names as well regarding their sexual behaviour. So women are kind of given a choice. You're either virginal or you're a slut. But at the same time, women are fed a message that they are responsible for contraception, that it is their fault if there is an unplanned pregnancy, completely bypassing the fact that it takes two people to have a baby. It's a woman's fault if she gets pregnant in an unplanned way. Now, recently I was watching Lessons in Chemistry, which is set in the 1950s, and in this show, the lead character, played by Brie Larson, has an unplanned pregnancy, and her partner, who passed away, so she was going to be an unwed single mother, and because of that, she lost her job. Now, it was the 1950s, and that wasn't uncommon at the time, but the nature of the conversation was that she was the one who got knocked up. She was the one that was at fault for having a baby outside of marriage. However, when we look at men and how men are represented in terms of their sexual behaviour, they often get status for their sexual prowess, and they are seen as more of a man for having many sexual conquests. So there is this massive split, if you like, between how men and women are treated in terms of their sexual behaviour. Now, when we look at age, a lot of the sociological study is focused on youth sexual behaviour, and there is a kind of ignorance around the elderly sexual behaviour. However, we know from statistics and recent reports that there is an increasing number of STIs within the over 60s. Many not using contraception or condoms or anything like that because they're kind of like, well, I can't get pregnant, so where's the issue? However, the over 60s are the second largest group for STI transmission in the UK currently. But when we do look at media representations of young people and their sexual behaviour, they are often represented as being hypersexualized in the media, that everything in their life revolves around having sex, getting sex, being sexual in some way. Examples can be seen in many teen movies where it's all about getting the boyfriend or getting the girl or getting the girlfriend, and their status within high school or college is about being in a relationship. And many of these films, there is a whole series, the American Pie series, which is all about high school sexuality. But also this kind of gives the impression of young people engaging in unprotected and underage sex. Now, the most recent British Sexual Attitudes Survey, which was conducted, I believe, just before COVID hit, so that would have been 2020, showed that the average age for first sex in the UK is actually almost 19. Yet the media would have us believe that 12-year-olds are having sex, that there's sex happening in school bathrooms. Not going to go down that one. But there is this representation of young people being very, very hypersexualized. This was very prominent in the TV show Skins, along with drug taking and alcohol abuse and things like that. And then you've got disability, which we talked about recently, where disabled people are rarely shown as sexual people. They're rarely shown as engaging in normal relationships. Instead, they're shown as comedy value when they are engaging in sexual behaviour. They look at the deficits and the difficulties that disabled people may face whilst engaging in sexual activity, without really paying attention to the fact that disabled people do have sex and they do engage in normal, intimate relationships. But that doesn't get people to watch TV shows and films and things like that. However, Batchelor et al. In 2004 did a content analysis where they pointed out that the media is getting better when it comes to discussing sexual behaviour and showing sexual behaviour in the media. They found that there is a greater discussion around sexual health, and TV shows like Sex Education, Sex and the City and things like that often show people getting checked for their sexual health. They talk about contraception and the equal responsibility that comes with contraception, as well as lots of more recently, particularly with the He/She campaign and things like that, discussion around consent and what consent is and what consent isn't. So although the media still sticks with some pretty old-fashioned tropes regarding sexual behaviour, they are changing. Now, if we look at media representation of sexuality in terms of attraction, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the LGBTQA+ community. Now, I will try to get that in the right order as I go through this lecture, but I'm almost certain at some point I will mess it up. Now, generally, when we're talking about sexuality within the media in terms of attraction, we see it shown through a heteronormative lens. Now, what that means is we see the LGBTQA plus community the way that heterosexual people believe that these people are. They show, as the pluralists say, they show the dominant ideas around the LGBTQA plus community, rather than showing a realistic representation of these groups. Now, Dyer in 2002 points out that the media often uses stereotypical characterizations of gayness, his word, not mine, in order to make what is invisible visible. You cannot tell from looking at somebody if they are part of the LGBTQA plus community. And therefore, it is important that the media uses signs of gayness such as vocal tics, facial expressions, stances, clothing, and attitudes to make visible what is in fact invisible. Craig in 1992 showed that there were 3 signifiers that the media tended to use when portraying the LGBTQA plus community. The first is campness, and this is possibly the most prominent representation of LGBTQA plus people in the media at present. They're seen as flamboyant, as over-dramatic, as effeminate, and bitchy, and promiscuous, and funny, and always happy on the outside whilst being miserable on the inside. And I'm not saying they are, because again, this is the stereotype, the signifier that Craig showed. He also talked about the macho stereotype as popularized by the pop group The Village People, who, if you remember, sang the YMCA, and there was another song that was very famous by them, but I can't remember what it was right now. The stereotype here relies on exaggerating masculinity whilst also being overly sexual in their look. So the Village People, it was a lot of open shirts or toplessness. You had the transformation of practical male clothing to look sexual. In the Village People, you had a construction worker, you had someone in the Navy, a police officer, a cowboy, an Indian, and a biker. And they were turning what was pretty much everyday clothing for most people into some sort of erotic symbol. Research suggests that this media representation is regarded as kind of threatening, particularly by men, because they see it as subverting traditional masculinity and taking away something from them, and making it not theirs. Again, not my views, this is just what the media is putting out there. And the final one is about the deviant LGBTQA plus, not just that they're evil, but they're devious, and that they are sexual predators, people who feel tremendous guilt about their sexuality, so hide it from those around them. Dyer claims that they are rarely presented in a sympathetic manner, even when the plots tend to focus on heterosexual characters' acceptance of homosexuality. There is still that guilt and deviousness that is put alongside being gay. A common thing that is seen in the media is when somebody comes out as LGBTQA+, the response is usually, why didn't you tell me sooner? And yet, as heterosexuals, there is no expectation that you announce your sexuality to the world, or tell people your sexuality. So there's also this kind of deviousness within the representation of the LGBTQA plus community. Batchelor also points out that a lot of LGBTQA plus characters are shown as being a source of anxiety, a target of teasing and bullying. And this is often seen as through homophobic language that's used at them, through discussions of what is and is not traditionally acceptable within the heteronormative way. The heteronormative lifestyle. So often what we see in terms of sexuality when it comes to the stereotypes is they are over-exaggerated stereotypes of the LGBTQA+. And if you like, part of that is to make it obvious that this character is LGBTQA+, and therefore it becomes central to that character that this is who they are. Which leads us on to talking about symbolic annihilation. We've talked about symbolic annihilation a lot before. It is the one-dimensional invisibility of LGBTQA plus characters, where when they are represented, they are one-dimensional and their sexuality is everything. That is who they are. They are the LGBTQA plus character. Now that also links in with the tokenism that we've talked about previously. Now I've got the date wrong here, it's 2011, not 1992. In 2011, LGBT.co.uk and Stonewall conducted a content analysis of over 126 hours of TV and film from 2011 to see how the LGBTQA plus community was being represented in that snapshot of time. And what they found was that out of 126 hours of TV, only 5 hours and 43 minutes were focused on LGBTQA plus issues. Now, if we work out what that is as a percentage, no, I've got to do it the other way. Sorry. No, I can't do it. I meant to do it before I recorded the lecture, but I forgot. It's a very small percentage of 126 hours. And what they also found was that there was literally only 46 minutes of realistic portrayal of LGBTQAI+ people within those 126 hours. That these communities are either not there at all, completely invisible, particularly lesbians and bisexuals, but when they are there, they are not shown what life is like for them. It is shown in a way that is creating a false narrative around what it means to be LGBTQA+ in the world today. And they argue that that is because of institutional bias within the media industry, that there aren't enough people who come from the LGBTQA+ community in positions where they are able to ensure more realistic representation of the issues that they face, or realistic representations that go beyond the fact that this character happens to be gay. We still see in the media that there is a lot of angst around coming out, and as I said before, we never see that with heterosexual people. There's a really brilliant clip in Love, Simon where they're talking about coming out and how it's really bizarre that LGBTQA plus people are expected to announce their sexuality, whereas heterosexual people are not. And it's a really interesting kind of stimulus for discussion to kind of go, well, why do they have to do that? Does that have to become part of their master status, when for heterosexual people it's just part of who they are? Now, GLAAD, which is a US gay rights advocate group, in 2015 looked at the top 100 films of 2014. Now, I was trying to remember what one of the big films of 2014 was, but it's 10 years ago and I can't actually remember. But when looking at this 100 films, what they found was only 17 of those 100 featured openly LGBTQA plus characters. Now, there may have been a few more that were insinuated or inferred to be part of the community, but there was only 17 films that had openly LGBTQA plus characters, and of that, only 7 where their sexuality was not the defining feature of the character, where had you not known they were gay, it would not have changed the plot, it would not have changed the story going forward, it would not have changed who that character was. But what we're seeing here is this very narrow representation of the LGBTQA plus community is denying them realistic representation. It's denying them the ability to see themselves on screen. And for those people who are not part of that community, it gives them a false narrative about what it's like, or what it means to be LGBTQA plus. Now, if we move on now to look at the news and advertising, what we see here is some improvements. Now, TV and film are getting better, but they still need to make it obvious about the sexuality of their characters. So advertisers have realised that there is a pink economy, as it's been called, where LGBTQA people who are professionals, they have no dependents, which means they have large disposable incomes, which gives them consumer power. So advertisers are starting to look to the LGBTQ community as a prominent consumer group. So we've seen there's been Calvin Klein adverts that have included same-sex couples around Pride Month in the summer. You see companies jumping on board with the rainbows and supporting LGBTQ communities. Now, it'd be good if they did that all year, but at least they're making it obvious during Pride Month. And then there was the Campbell's Soup advert, which featured 2 dads giving their son lunch of a can of Campbell's Soup. Now, this particular advert did garner a lot of backlash on social media, with many people commenting, saying that they're supposed to be selling soup, not sexuality, that people would not be buying Campbell's Soup ever again. And Campbell's were pretty good at responding and kind of going, I'm sure we won't miss you buying our soup, to most of the people that were saying, I'm never going to buy Campbell's Soup again, woke agenda and all of that malarkey. Now, so we are seeing in advertising much more inclusivity and much more representation of the LGBTQA plus community. Now, I won't say it's realistic representation, because they are trying to sell you stuff. So even adverts for that are aimed towards the heteronormative community, still not realistic. It's that whole kind of, this is what I thought I was going to buy, this is what I actually got situation. but that's the nature of advertising. In terms of the news, there has been a shift towards more inclusivity in news representation of the LGBTQA+ community. However, the right-wing press still have an issue with the LGBTQA+ community, seeing it as sinful, as wicked, as unnatural, and also the defining feature of the person within the story. Whereas it's not real, it's not realistic. They are trying to push their agenda. There was a couple of years ago lots and lots of headlines around drag queen story time. Now bear in mind, a drag queen doesn't have to necessarily be somebody who is gay or trans. They are a character that is being played. Think Paul O'Grady, whose character was Lily Savage. He didn't want to be Lily Savage. That was just the character that he played. However, the right-wing media was up in arms about these drag queens in nothing more than pantomime dress, if you like, reading stories to children in a library and saying how it was pushing the trans agenda. They were reading stories, picture books to children. And these right-wing media didn't seem to have a problem with people going to the pantomime and seeing a pantomime dame, which is traditionally drag. But what we see in the news is it started to become more subversive in terms of the anti-LGBTQA+ rhetoric, because now people will complain, and newspapers have the IOPCO, who is there to monitor what newspapers are putting out. So they're a little bit more subtle about it, but they're still very anti-LGBTQA+. Now finally, new media. So the new media has provided a positive representation of the LGBTQ community. Just like we saw with gender, where women found the fact that new media gave them a voice, it gave them a platform to raise concerns, to share their issue, to find other people, excuse me, who felt the way that they did, and who to forward issues that were important to them. The LGBTQA+ community has also found that within new media, and partly this is because it is user generated. That means that those in the LGBTQA+ community have found a way to have a voice. They have websites and organizations that have set up support and advice sites, places people who are coming to terms with their sexuality, or learning about the LGBTQA+ community can go and get advice from people within that community, rather than misinformation and twisted information from those who aren't fans of the community. And social media has been really, really important in progressing LGBTQA+ issues, such as things like same-sex marriage, and where the hashtag, what was it, Love Wins, was used over 3.6 million times when the US legalized same-sex marriage. And it also allows for support for social media from social media companies, such as the rainbow filter you can get for your social media profiles, for in providing a platform for things like pride parades and events that are happening within the LGBTQ community. However, we know that this is not always the positive thing. Just like we saw with gender, where yes, new media gave women a voice, but it also opened them up to even more degradation and trolling and things like that. The University of Alberta did a content analysis of all public, you need to make that clear, public social media posts from 2012 to 2015. And what they looked for were 4 particularly negative words relating to the LGBTQA+ community. Now, I don't know what those words were. I'm still trying to find that out. If I find out, I will let you know. And what they found was that these 4 words were recorded 56.5 million times in public posts between 2012 and 2015. And where they did check to make sure how these words were being used, because obviously, as we know, words can have multiple meanings. And in this case, they were used 56.5 million times in homophobic or transphobic nature, showing that there really is an issue with transphobia, homophobia within social new media as well. So yes, it is being a positive for the LGBTQA+ community, but they have to face some negativeness as well. In 2015, BT were criticised because they, as part of their parental controls, as part of a way for children to feel safe on the internet, they added to their filter a way for parents to block children's access to LGBTQA+ lifestyle sites. So we're not talking pornography here, we're not talking about sexualizing children. We're talking about sites, we're talking about sites which inform children or inform people in general. But alongside this, it also blocks sites that discussed abortion, STIs and contraception. So BT were massively criticised for allowing this filter within their internet package, as it was denying children access to information. Now, what we can say then is, by looking at media representations of sexuality, we can go back to the pluralist argument of it's just showing the dominant views, or the Marxist argument of that they are profit-making businesses, so they're aiming their products to an audience which is majority heteronormative. However, we are seeing there is a symbolic annihilation of the LGBTQAI+ community. There is these negative stereotypes around this community, but there is evidence that things are changing.